Welcome to Ordinary to Badass. Whether you're ordinary or badass, I'm so glad you're here. Today's guest is Kara Goodwin. Kara, thank you so much for being here. Excited to have you on the show.
Thank you, Marie. So wonderful to be here.
So, before we go any further, I've got to ask, do you consider yourself ordinary or badass?
I I've been so excited to answer this question. I'm gonna go with badass. Do I
Yes.
win?
Have you always felt that way?
Oh gosh. Well, no, really. This is something that I'm kind of stepping into more and more, and it's one of those like, let's own it and let's step into it. But there's still definitely a part of me that feels ordinary and wants to claim the badassness. But I think a lot of us are always working with that of wanting to level up, wanting to really step into the fullness of who we are. And part of that is just reaching to what we aspire to be, and going beyond our limitations in that way.
So, what's one thing that you've done that has made you feel more badass?
I think that really stems around my meditation practice. So this is where I focus a lot of my attention is on meditation. And I developed a practice. I started diving into meditation many years ago, um, kind of out of necessity. A lot of it was out of curiosity because, of course, we have a lot of different ways that we can approach life's struggles. Um, so I had a lot of different things that I could have done, but that was kind of the one that really stuck for trying to make a shift in my life, that was really needed at that time. And so really embodying that practice and continuing to explore and to excavate and really take a really honest look at myself and where my shortcomings are, and where I know that I can do better, and to continue to have that takes courage, to keep looking, keep trying, keep failing and trying again. That is where the badassery comes in, I think, because it's those stories where we just have it made and we don't have any friction and we don't have anything to overcome. We don't really get the opportunity to really see who we are, and if we are made of that good stuff. So I don't know if that answers your question or not, but
No, so good. And yeah, I agree. I think some of those hard situations are what gives us kind of the grit and the tenacity to keep on going and really helps us discover who we are.
right, absolutely.
So I want to dive into so much about your meditation journey, but first, will you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes. So I am a meditation coach. I teach some meditation classes and I have some offerings as well. Um, I have a podcast called The Meditation Conversation, and I run retreats. So I try to find a lot of different ways to help people come into their center and get beyond kind of the physical and the emotional and the mental, because in the West, speaking with, painting with very broad strokes, we tend to really see life and accept life from the physical, the mental, and the emotional. And we've got this whole other aspect to us that is that kind of what's behind all of that, what's animating all of that, and who is that person. And a lot of times, we're really cut off from that. So my joy is really in helping people to expand their awareness of who they are, to help it encompass that fourth aspect of this animating, spirit, or however you want to think of it, but that eternal aspect of who we are, but not in any sort of dogmatic or religious way, but opening people up to that is really where my joy comes from.
So, what is something people usually struggle with when it comes to opening up the eternal aspect of who they are?
Well, there are a lot of things, because a lot of this gets tied into religion for one thing, and there are a lot of people who have trauma around religion, where they were, where it was kind of used against them. I see that a lot, where they've come to reject everything because it's associated with something difficult in their life, or it was used as a means of control. Um, and so there are a lot of people who just don't, they've rejected all of that with their lives. And then there are just people who are they're just very I'm going to say material, and I don't want that to sound like it's like, I'm a material girl and I love shoes and bags. It's not like about the superficiality, but it's about like, I trust what I can experience through the physical. I trust what I can touch. I trust what I can see. I trust what I can hear. And it's this kind of not understanding this. There hasn't been an introduction or a nurturing of that which is within us, which we are all capable of connecting to, but which is not really nurtured so much in the Western society. So it goes unnoticed. And that can be super fun to just start to explore that and be like, oh my God, I get messages in my body. Like, some people feel it, some people hear it, some people see it, or they get it through dreams or whatever. But it's like this continuing expansion that we are so much more than what we're experiencing through the five senses.
So, for some people, I can imagine that would feel a little bit woo woo or a little bit out there, especially if they haven't done a whole lot of meditation. What would you say to the person that is considering starting, but they're not sure how to do it or if it's for them?
That's a great question. And around the woo woo, that can also be a barrier, because that can be, even within like spiritual communities, people tease each other about like, well, that's so woo, but there's so much scientific evidence around all of these concepts. So even like Einstein's theory of relativity, where that's stating that matter is energy in motion. That he understood, and Nikola Tesla, they understood that energy was this driving force that was animating everything, connecting everything. So I can understand that, because I've been there too, where I'm like, oh, I'm leaving that stuff. Even when I started approaching meditation, it really was a coping mechanism, and for me, it's been kind of a slow process of accepting that expansion that I was talking about, kind of expanding beyond the physical. When I started meditation, it really was like, I need to feel calmer. I need to kind of just feel like something that is more, that seemed more reliable than the day to day that was going on around me. But it really wasn't like, didn't pray before I meditated. I was taught to pray before I meditated, but I didn't. And so really the spiritual aspect of it was not of interest to me. And so there are lots of different ways to take meditation, to take your practice. And so it doesn't have to be a woo-woo thing. It can really just be about that physical. And what often happens is, like, the more you get into it, the more things start to open up, and it's kind of like, wait a minute, like, is that light that I'm seeing? Or like this, what is this calmness that's washing over me? You start to just experience these things that do start to open you up more and more. And it's like, more connections to people, and more like synchronicities start to show up, and it sort of lays the groundwork to, explore these other aspects of ourselves.
So you've talked a little bit about like connection to other people or calmness. What are other benefits that meditation brings?
Sleeping better is a wonderful benefit. Meditation works really effectively on the nervous system. So if you find yourself often in a state of anxiety or in a state of depression, both of those are, meditation can be very helpful, because those tend to be to do with the nervous system and with imbalances in the nervous system. So when we talk about that, the nervous system is used as our, if you want to really narrow it down, you've got the parasympathetic nervous system and the sympathetic nervous system. And our sympathetic nervous system is that fight or flight or freeze. It's what we use when we need to get out of danger. And it's really just meant to kick in when we really need it, when we need to run away, when we need to defend ourselves. The parasympathetic is that rest and restore when everything's okay and things go back into balance and our system starts regenerating the way it's meant to. So our cells slough off and reproduce, and our heart rate goes down, and all of our organs start to replenish. When we're in a state of anxiety, for example, we're continuously in the sympathetic nervous system, even though there is no danger. We're perceiving danger from the past because we're replaying things that have already happened, and we're bringing them into the present moment, or we're projecting out into all these different future scenarios that probably aren't going to happen, but we're bringing them into the present moment, and we're responding physiologically as though we're in that dangerous situation, or a situation that we fear. That can even just be, having a discussion with our mother that, is coming, that we're, worried is not going to go right. And that makes us physiologically respond in such a way that we're active in the sympathetic nervous system. So meditation works with your brain waves. It works with your nervous system to help calm you down. And over time, what happens, and it doesn't take that long. There are studies that talk about in as little as 12 to 15 minutes for 8 weeks of meditation, that there are changes to the brain. The prefrontal cortex gets stronger. And we can talk about why that's important in a minute. But we have these physiological changes that happen, and it doesn't take, hours of meditation over a long period of time. And then that's just, I'm talking about that study from a brain standpoint, but of course there are different effects that happen that you notice fairly rapidly, like space in between being triggered and responding, so that it's not these quick knee-jerk responses. For instance, when we talk about the brain, we can, the brain is obviously very complex. From a meditation standpoint, we can look at it from the aspect of the prefrontal lobes, which are kind of just right there in the forehead, and the limbic system, which is the lower part of the brain. And the limbic system is kind of our animalistic brain. It's been, it's the oldest part of the brain. So it has served us through our evolution. It's always been there, and we share the limbic system with other animals. But as the human brain evolved, we eventually got this prefrontal cortex, or the prefrontal lobes. That's the most evolved part of our brain. And that's where we have our joy and our creativity and our altruism and our connection. So if you're in an MRI and they're scanning and they're stimulating, fear, for example, it will activate the limbic system. That old part of the brain will be activated and lit up on an MRI. And when you have peace or joy or connection, when they're showing images such as that, then it activates the limbic system, and they typically don't work at the same time. So the stronger we're making the prefrontal cortex, the more that becomes our default, even outside of meditation. So it's got this beautiful benefit where you feel great when you're done meditating, but it continues to build if you have a regular practice, so that you can have those beautiful results, carried on.
Yeah. And I will say for me, initially, all of the science was very intimidating because I am not a science girl. And so, like, it was like, it just was intimidating and kind of maybe pushed me away from it a little bit. I read Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself by Joe Dispenza, and
Oh,
it just like blew my mind. And it did talk a lot about the science stuff, but it was like, it was still interesting enough, or like dumbed down enough for me.
accessible enough.
Yeah. So that I could take it and like apply it to my life. And like, but there's still comfort in knowing like, okay, this is backed by science, you know?
Right.
Yeah. And then I would even argue, even if you're not interested in the science effects, like you can still see the effects in your daily life just from meditating for 10 minutes.
Exactly. Yes. And that's what's important. I mean, the scientific studies, for some people, that does scratch the itch of like, oh, that's really interesting. And Joe Dispenza loves his science studies.
Yeah.
He's great with that. Um, but yeah, the important thing is, how does it change you? How does it make you feel? Absolutely.
And how has meditation changed you?
Well, so I've hinted a few times that, the whole way that it started was out of necessity. And that was really more of a reflection of some absolute chaos that kicked up in my life within the span of a few months, within one calendar year, but starting in May and ending in November. I had the sudden and unexpected death of my sister-in-law, who left two little ones behind. Um, and like a couple of weeks later, our dog died, and then my father-in-law had a really delicate surgery on his brain stem. They weren't sure what was wrong with him, and we weren't sure what was going to happen with this surgery. And then my mother-in-law was hit by a motorbike while she crossed the street. So she was in the hospital for a long time recovering. And then my stepmom had a heart transplant.
Oh,
So
goodness.
within this, and we were living in Italy at the time. My husband and two kids and I were in Italy. So all of this was happening without us really being able to be there as much as we wanted to. My in-laws are in England, and my family was in America. So I got to the point, I mean, we all got to the point where it was like, and that was just in my immediate family, but that was a wild year just all around. I had a lot of friends going through a lot as well. And it felt like reality was shifting into something that, it was like, do I want to answer the phone? It's like you see a phone, it's like, oh no, when the phone rings, it's bad news. Do I even want to answer this? And so this was why I even initiated into meditation. Like I mentioned before, we have different ways that we can cope with things. I thought I'd start with that approach. And it really did help me. And I took baby steps. That was important, to not feel like I had to sit down and be still for like 30 minutes, like starting with 5 minutes. And again, very focused on the physical and like the emotional, the mental, um, and I really found that it helped me. That response time was probably the first thing that I noticed, that because my kids were young, and so there's a lot of like knee-jerk responses when your kids are like triggering you. And I just found that I wouldn't get triggered as easily, or there'd be more space before I would respond, so I could be more thoughtful about my responses. Um, and I would say that was definitely like the first kind of real benefit that I noticed from it.
So I know that you talk about a bit about like the power within us,
Mhm.
and how do we hone in on that more? And then also, what are we doing to deny it?
Oh, that's great. Well, part of it is just the awareness. So understanding that, and kind of accepting that a lot of the responses that we have, even though it feels like it's coming from us, is a product of our conditioning. So whether that's through our families, the family we grew up with, whatever's being reinforced within whatever family unit we have today, culture, whatever culture we're in and how that reinforces things. That was something, when I have lived abroad, that um, I found really fascinating, where, I remember distinctly talking with a group of moms when I lived in Italy, and they were talking about different approaches. Like in America, I don't know if they still do this. It's been a long time since I've had babies, but there was something called cry it out. Are you familiar with cry it out?
I've heard of it. Yeah.
Okay, so basically, like it's sleep training. You're not afraid if your child cries, and you let them cry. Um, the moms that I was talking to in Italy were like, "No, you absolutely cannot do that." And it was like, wait, what? I mean, I was used to having conversations with Americans where it was like, yeah, cry it out. And not everybody did it, but it was like it wasn't seen as this like really aggressive thing. And then I'm having this conversation with, granted, it was a select few people, but, it was like, oh my God, never, you can never do that, and that was pretty consistent in that group. And for me, that was such an interesting thing, because I kind of understood it from a cultural perspective. Like in America, we do tend to value our independence, and it's not within the family. In Italy, it's not so much like that. They're okay if the grown children stay home, for a much longer time than we typically see here. Um, but anyway, there is indoctrination with your culture that we don't even realize. It's just what we see everybody else doing. We accept as that's how you live. We may have, like we mentioned before, religious things that have kind of indoctrinated us and patterned us and our behaviors, our responses, what we think is acceptable. The media, of course, what we're idolizing on screen. So all of these things are like these external influences that are piling on us, and they're contributing to what we think of ourselves, what we think of others, what is acceptable, what we think our response needs to be. Um, one example that I've given to my students before is like being late. I know that through my family, it was entrenched. You're not late. You're not late. Like it was important that you're not late. So I just assumed like that was important. And it's only been relatively recently that I'm kind of like, is it important? I mean, yeah, you want to respect people, but like, do we need to get upset at our children because they're making us late? Like, is it worth it to go into, to reinforce that within them? How big of a deal is it? Do I need to be deeply offended if somebody is late, when they're meeting with me? All these things that just were the way that I lived, it was like disrespectful if somebody, showed up late. And then it was kind of like, but is it, or have I just bought into that? It's just one kind of benign example where it's like, we may just totally take it for granted that we've accepted that that's how things are. So when we take that back into power, it's this understanding that we have all of this influence that is driving who we think we are. And that excavation, meditation can be an amazing tool. It's not like with meditation, we sit there and we just think. Actually, you're trying to go beyond thought. So it's not it's not a mental exercise to go and say, okay, what are my external influences? Where did this behavior come from? Where are these patterns? Where did they come from? But meditation gives us that stillness so that we start to be able to connect with that inner knowing within us. We start to experience ourselves authentically without that external, because it's bringing all of the attention inward and coming deep inside and discovering ourselves from that aspect, and in trying to see ourselves without that lens of the external. Does that make sense?
So is that what the power within then is, harnessing like your inner answers as opposed to what the whole world outside of you is trying to say?
Exactly. Yes. It would be that, because eventually, with a meditation practice, you can start to discover this guidance system that is within you, where you can feel within you. You can feel if something feels right, if it doesn't. Does something feel true? Does it not? Um, and it gives you this capability to be able to more easily get this guidance, even if you, again, even if you're, it's not like, this form shows up in front of your bed and is like, you must take the job, or it's much subtler than that. But meditation, because we get into that quietness, we start to be able to read these subtle cues that are happening, so that we can stand in our own power, and we can be not so swayed by those external forces.
So I would love for you to talk a little bit about energy and meditation. And I think it's so interesting because at different points in my life, meditation, I've had different energy with it.
Mm.
Like sometimes like I do have like these big takeaways, or these big aha moments. And when I was new at it, it seemed like they were more often almost.
Oh,
And then now I'm doing like a 1 hour a day for 90 days challenge to meditate for an hour every day.
that's
And it's funny because I'm not having these like big aha moments that I was having before, but I'm definitely noticing like a lack of stress or a lack of reactivity to other people's stuff, because I'm like, oh, that's about them, not about me, you know. But
uh-huh.
I do think it's very interesting about energy with meditation. So I'd just love for you to talk about that.
Oh, thank you for sharing that, because you really bring up an important point, which is, I mean, and this is not directly answering your question yet, but that, isn't it fascinating how the length of your meditation, like what that does to it? So that deep calmness that you're carrying with you by doing a longer practice for a series of days like that. But I know that for me, one of the challenges of when I've tried to go much longer time than what I'm used to, it takes me a lot longer to rein my mind in, because I feel like I've got all day, so I'll get there. It's like, oh, I'm doing an hour here. I don't need to focus like super hard in the first 15 minutes. We'll just do my laundry or my shopping list, or whatever. Um, but really, that energy is such an interesting topic because it's nebulous, right? I mean, we know energy from like a very grounded physical sense of like how it powers things, right? So if we even take energy away from meditation, like we understand energy in that, you know, we have Wi-Fi, you and I are connecting right now online. There's Wi-Fi that's streaming in. This is like an invisible force that's helping us to communicate right now. We have radio waves that we are immersed in right now that we don't notice because we don't have a radio receiver here. If we had a radio and we tuned it into the frequencies that were here, then we would be able to interact with that invisible energy that's around us. So meditation is really this way that we start to interact with that energy that we are. We can think of it as this stream of energy that we are, that's an eternal aspect of who we are. And then the body is this physical representation of that. You can start to tune in even to the energy around you that is you still, but it's beyond the body. There are people who see auras, who can see the colors that are around a person. You can kind of put your hands together, if kind of put them close together, but they're not touching. You can start to feel like the energy that's radiating off of your palms, viscerally, where it's like, oh, wait, why is it that they can feel like they're magnetized, like either they're pushing apart or they're being pulled together. But it's interesting, the force that you can feel. So meditation is a really effective way to help us get in tune with that energy. And when you talk about the different qualities of your meditation based on what behaviors you're doing or what methods you're using, that's a beautiful way to start to experience yourself energetically, in that way.
And how is energy important in meditation?
Well, energy is that fundamental aspect of something bigger than what we are. So we can think of energy, and we can relate it to consciousness. This is kind of another way that we work with ourselves in meditation. And we're used to, a lot of people understand the concept of consciousness, our regular waking consciousness, where it's just an awareness, like what is around you, what are you aware of. Then we have like the subconscious mind, and this would be where we usually go when we're dreaming. It's where our habits are. It's where all of the automated functioning within our body happens. We don't have to tell our heart to beat. The subconscious is helping to make sure that keeps happening. We don't tell our hair to grow. The subconscious takes care of that. But the subconscious is also, when we start talking about that wiring and all the habits and everything like that we are, that's all stored and coming in from the subconscious. With meditation, we can start to access what we can think of as the superconscious mind. And that would be a higher state of consciousness than our regular waking consciousness. So it's kind of this rising above the consciousness. And so the reason that I talk about this in terms of energy is that sometimes when we sit to meditate, we may feel like we have fallen asleep. And this is why I don't recommend lying down when we meditate. I recommend sitting up, because it's harder to fall asleep when we're sitting up. But we start to, our body knows if we haven't been meditating, if we don't have a meditation practice, it's like, well, I'm awake or I'm asleep. It's like, if I'm going to close my eyes and be quiet, then I'm going to go to sleep. So there can be that whole kind of reset within, where it's like, oh, nope, we've got a third option, body. We don't have to always go to sleep when we close our eyes. But when we talk about like energy levels and consciousness, when we do start to feel like we might be drifting into sleep, there's kind of a downward pull of energy, where it's kind of like this, our focus and our awareness starts to sort of sink. And that can kind of lead us, be the precursor to sleep. But what happens too with students will be that they might say, I'm not sure if I fell asleep, like something happened and I wasn't in my normal, essentially what they're wanting to say, I wasn't in my normal state of consciousness, but they only know sleep and wake, so it's like, I don't think I was sleeping, but I wasn't awake. And it's like, oh, there are other states of consciousness. So you're starting to unlock these other higher states of consciousness, but you don't even know that you might have access to that. And so meditation is working with that energy, working with consciousness, and starting to explore these other avenues that we have of what we experience.
So, can we control our subconscious or control it on any level, like what we're thinking subconsciously?
That is such a wonderful question. And that's another thing that that meditation is great for. Of course, we need the subconscious, so we don't want to think of it as a bad thing. I mean, we can't there's so much stimuli even in a quiet setting that we're not even the consciousness is filtering out so much so that it's not overwhelming. But when we start thinking about those patternings that are under the surface and some of those things that are making us tick, but not necessarily for our benefit, they're just these cycles, this way we're cycling through life. Um, I think of it like, those pictures of the icebergs, and you can like see what's below the water level and what's above, and then underneath the surface of the water is like this enormous mass of ice compared to what's above the surface. We can think of that as like the subconscious is what's under the water of an iceberg, and the conscious mind is what's above it. And I think of it as like with meditation, the more we are using meditation, the more we are coming into awareness of these habits that we have and these thought patterns that we have, and we work with them to catch ourselves. Oh, I'm caught in a thought that isn't even true. I'm telling myself something about myself that's not true, about who I am because I'm late. Does that make me a terrible person? Or who this person is because they were late. Or I'm just cycling, but I'm catching it, and I'm patterning. Wait, that's not true. Just that simple act of catching it, we're lowering that water level so that something that used to be hidden is now exposed, and we're working with it. And so that it's not this, it's not a hidden thing, and we're not at its mercy. We start to become masters of our responses. And that is truly empowering, where it's like, I understand that I don't always feel great about what's happening around me. But when I notice that I'm in judgment, or that I'm in fear, or that I am projecting out into the future and focused on a future potentiality that I don't even want, but I'm focusing on it, so I'm kind of drawing it in. Because there's this great saying that where our thoughts go is where the energy flows. So the more that we're focused on this potential outcome that we don't want, the more we're actually drawing it to us. So all of that is working with the subconscious mind to bring it above the surface so that we can work with it, and so that it doesn't become this automatic running thing that's happening in the background.
Yes, no, I loved that answer. And I loved like the analogy of lowering the water level. I think it's so important. And something we often talk about on the Ordinary to Badass podcast is confidence and mindset. And that is a huge part of being a badass, is the mindset piece of it. But I would think, based on what you were saying, if we're catching our thoughts and then reframing them or analyzing them, if there's a different thing we could say, that could definitely show an increase of confidence.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it goes hand in hand. The more we start to master who we are, we start to master our thought patterns and our responses. Just knowing who we are and what's important to us and where we stand, and having that integrity, knowing that we're aligned with our values, and that our actions, being thoughtful about our actions, and what we say yes to and what we say no to, that even if people expect it from us, but we know that that's not in alignment for whatever reason, because we don't have time to do it properly, or we don't agree with it, or it's not where we're going. So maybe it's something we used to do and we used to say yes to, but that's not where we're going now. So we're staying attuned to where we're focused. I mean, the confidence that comes with that, you can't beat it. It's so authentic. It's because it's really knowing who you are, And I think we often feel like we know who we are. We might know what we like and we don't like, but it's really through taking a true, really directing our attention inward that we really start to truly embody that.
Yes, yes, so good. And I know it always blows my mind. Like just when I think I know myself, then it's like you go through a whole other thing and you're like, wait, who am I? Or you're like constantly rediscovering it.
Yes. Yeah.
So
That's awesome.
let's end with a tip to encourage women who are in the arena fighting for the life that they want.
I love that. One tip is this is so easy that it sounds like it's not even going to be valuable, but tuning into the breath is huge. So we talked about the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous system. The breath is really closely tied with that. So you have this instant access point to change your physiology and to change your response is in terms of the physiological response. So when you find yourself in a state of uncertainty or fear, or where you're not feeling up to something, or you're not feeling confident, really just first of all noticing that you're feeling that way, because how often do we run that runs away and it's running the whole show and we don't even recognize, like, why? Oh, I don't feel like I know what I'm doing right now. But really taking just a moment to take a few deep breaths really down into the tummy. You can even feel like you're filling your hips with the breath and just taking a nice big inhale, exhale. Do that a few times and it kicks in your parasympathetic nervous system and it resets your whole being. So again, like, we all have access to this. We can do it at a moment's notice. But really just adding that in as needed can really be so beneficial.
So good. And Kara, I'd like to know how we can connect with you. And then also I think you have a meditation to share.
Yeah. So I have my website. It's karagoodwin.com. Kara is with a K. And on that website, there is, I think you just scroll down a tiny bit and then you can sign up to receive a free guided meditation, which is like 10 minutes long. And it's really powerful. It's really calming. It will get your nervous system reset. Um, so that's totally free. I have some other offerings out there as far as if people want to learn how to meditate. I have a meditation immersion course, which is a 21-day program where you can learn at your self-paced, self-guided. And I have a community in there where we meet regularly online. And I just released a retreat today, like within the last couple of hours, that's out there now too. So lots of different ways to help you dive into this world of meditation pretty gently.
Kara, thank you so much. You've been a total badass and I've enjoyed hearing your story.
Oh, thanks so much, Marie, for having me on. What a joy to connect with you today.
And with that, we'll end our show. To all the badass women out there staying in the arena, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, own it and get after it.